My name is Stephanie, and I've been at Neighborhood for a long time now, and my job is to help our church make an impact in our city and our world, and Neighborhood Degree is one of the things I get to help lead, and tonight is super exciting. We are throwing a giant graduation party for our 17 seniors, and they're all headed to college this fall. So it's very exciting. And tonight, we are throwing a giant graduation party, and you are invited. If you've ever thought about being a mentor, or you want to check it out, or maybe you want to volunteer in the future, or if you just want to see the impact that you're making as part of Neighborhood Church in our city, we want you to come. Come hear their stories, come be part of our cheering section. We want to just celebrate these students and their families and the impact that they're going to make in the future. And I think if you come, you will leave feeling very hopeful about the future. So it's tonight, 7 o'clock in the kids' outpost, and we would love, love, love to have you come and cheer these students on. Well, this morning, we are talking about a mess, but kind of centered around knowledge. We've been in this series for the last couple of weeks called A Beautiful Mess, and we're studying the letter of a guy named Paul that he wrote to a church in the city of Corinth 2,000 years ago. And Corinth was in the Roman Empire. Now it's modern-day Greece. But 2,000 years ago, Corinth was a city that was known for being an epicenter of knowledge and wisdom. And all these traveling speakers would come through Corinth, and they would teach in these outdoor amphitheaters, and they would gain a following. And they would charge people money to hear them speak on things like philosophy and culture and life and religion. And people would come and they would listen to all these new ideas. And these speakers, they were called sophists, would gain a following. And they would get rich by having lots and lots of followers. And the followers would not only just come and listen, they would then argue with other followers of different teachers over which teacher was the best, what way of thinking was right. And this was the culture in Corinth, is that they would argue and argue over everything. And this is what Paul was in the middle of. And so he planted a church in Corinth, and then he stayed there for a little while, but then left to go start other churches. And he hears about what's happening in Corinth, and he writes them a letter. And I think Corinth is kind of similar to us, because in Corinth, they're arguing over who's the best. Kind of similar to how we are all fans of something. You're a fan of a sports team or a band or musician or a politician. And we argue over who's the best, and then we trash talk the rest. I mean, this was what Corinth was like. They would argue over who's the best, and they would decide who they wanted to follow, and then they'd boost their own reputation and claim their way as superior and everyone else as inferior. And the result of that kind of culture was that people were very divided. There was lots of arguing. And sadly, that culture was still making its way into the church. The Christians in that church, the early followers of Jesus, were arguing over which Christian teacher was the best and what way of thinking was the best. And they were arguing, and they were divided, and they were arrogant, and they were destroying the mission of the church. Because they had turned the message of Jesus into this weapon to defend themselves and tear down everybody else. And they were a mess. And so Paul hears about what's happening in Corinth, and so he writes them this letter. And this letter is filled with teachings that are so profound. They made their way into the Christian scriptures, and we're still learning from the words that Paul wrote 2,000 years later. And this letter to the Corinthians is filled with both this deep love and this blatant critique. This letter is filled with a lot of, I love you like you're my own kids, and I'm going to discipline you like you're my own kids. And in this letter, he talks about lots of different issues. So we're going to pick it up, and he's in the middle of scolding his kids. And this is the passage we're going to look at today. Paul wrote, "Judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. That he will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. Then you will not be puffed up in being a follower over one of us, over against another. For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? I mean, Paul is basically saying, stop acting like a bunch of know-it-alls and being all puffed up. I mean, why do you think you're so smart when you're just repeating what we taught you? And just because you know something, why do you think that makes you better than other people? See, the knowledge that you gained about God has gone to your heads instead of your hearts, and you've completely missed the point. And I find this very relatable because I think we still do this. I mean, we love knowledge. We love to be in the know, and we love to know the latest news and the inside scoop or gossip or slang. And we use our knowledge to make ourselves sound smart or cool or educated or in the know. And sometimes we use our knowledge to make other people feel stupid or insignificant or excluded. That we use our knowledge to build ourselves up and then tear other people down. And we claim that we're right, that we know the truth, and somehow that gives us the right to treat other people like trash because they're wrong or they're deceived or out of touch or just old. And I think there's lots of examples of this throughout our culture. I mean, if you look at the news or talk shows or TikTok or Facebook, Instagram, everywhere you look, there are people that are claiming that they know the truth and they're right, and therefore their rightness gives them the right to belittle anybody that disagrees with them. And I think there's plenty of examples of this throughout our culture. But when I read this passage, the image that came to my mind was from the movie Toy Story. Probably because I have a 3-year-old and we just showed her the movie Toy Story and she loves Buzz Lightyear. I got her a little Buzz Lightyear t-shirt and now she wears it every day and makes us call her Buzz. So this is Finley Buzz, and this is the image that came to my mind. Well, if you've never seen the movie Toy Story, it's about a group of toys that belong to a kid named Andy. And Andy has one toy that is a Sheriff Woody doll. And Woody has been Andy's favorite toy since he was little. And all the toys come to life when there's no humans in the room. And so Andy is kind of the leader of all the toys, and Woody is the leader, and he's been Andy's favorite toy for so long until one day Andy has a birthday, and he gets a brand new toy. And it's a Space Ranger Buzz Lightyear toy. Now, the problem with Buzz is that he doesn't know he's a toy. He thinks that he is actually the Buzz Lightyear, and it's up to him to save the planet and the universe from the evil Zurg, I think it is, but from the evil emperor. And so he thinks he's really more important than all the other toys because he really has a job to do and everybody else is just not that important. Now, Woody doesn't take so well to this because he knows that Buzz is actually a toy, and so he decides that he's going to confront Buzz Lightyear, and it doesn't go well. So I want to show you one clip from the movie, so take a look.
According to my Nava computer,
Shut up! Just shut up, you idiot!
Sheriff, this is no time to panic.
This is the perfect time to panic! I'm lost, Andy is gone, they're gonna move from their house in 2 days, and it's all your fault!
My fault? If you hadn't pushed me out of the window in the first place...
Oh, yeah, well, if you hadn't shown up your stupid little cardboard spaceship and taken away everything that was important to me...
Don't talk to me about importance. Because of you, the security of this entire universe is in jeopardy.
What? What are you talking about?
Right now, poised at the edge of the galaxy, Emperor Zurg has been secretly building a weapon with the destructive capacity to annihilate an entire planet. I alone have information that reveals this weapon's only weakness. And you, my friend, are responsible for delaying my rendezvous with Star Command.
You are a toy! You weren't the real Buzz Lightyear, you're an action figure! You are a child's plaything!
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity. Farewell.
Oh yeah? Well, good riddance, you loony!
And I love this scene because Buzz and Woody are arguing over whose truth is right. And Woody does what most of us do with other people. We want to just scream it in their face. But that does very little good. It does very little impact. And oftentimes we end up pushing people further away from the truth we want them to see, rather than opening their eyes to see it. And this is what was happening in Corinth. They were arguing and arguing, and in all their arguing, they weren't convincing anyone. And in fact, they were pushing people away from the church rather than bringing them to Jesus. And it didn't even matter who was right and who was wrong or what teacher really was the best, because that wasn't the point. They had completely missed the point. Later in the letter, Paul writes that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. See, the message of Jesus wasn't meant to boost your own ego and make you feel superior because you know the truth. That it was supposed to teach you to love each other and build each other up. That you can say that, hey, I know a lot about Jesus or the Bible or religion, but if you can't love the people in front of you, then your knowledge is useless. Like, your knowledge is useless if you don't know how to use it. And one of my favorite quotes is by a religious professor from the 16th century named Anthony of Padua. And every class he taught, he would open with this phrase: of what value is learning if it does not lead to love? Like, of what value is learning if it does not lead to love? I mean, what's the point about knowing a lot about Jesus if it doesn't lead you to love like Jesus? What's the point? Because in the kingdom of God, in the ways of Jesus, knowledge is just a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. And for the Corinthians, their knowledge had gone to their heads instead of their hearts, and it made them prideful and hurtful. And don't get me wrong, knowledge is important. Knowledge is necessary. We have church every Sunday. We do teachings. We encourage you to read the Bible on your own, to join a group, listen to podcasts, books. Knowledge is important. Knowledge is necessary to be able to follow Jesus. It's just not the goal. Because love is the goal. I mean, the message of Jesus is, in fact, very simple. It's love God, love people. Not complicated. It's just actually hard to do. And the more we learn about God and what he's like, hopefully the easier it becomes to love like he loves. See, the more knowledge that we gain, the easier it should become to give more love away. The more knowledge we gain, the easier it should be to give love away. And I think if the Corinthians had kept love at the center instead of knowledge, I don't think they would have been in the mess that they were in. And they were a hot mess. I mean, later in the letter, Paul goes through all kinds of issues that they're having, from infighting to incest. I mean, they were a complete mess. And they were walking around arrogantly thinking that they're fine, when in fact, they were a huge mess. And Paul hears about this, and so he writes them this letter because their pride had blinded them from seeing that eventually everything was just going to come crashing down. And Paul loves them, he cares about them, so he doesn't want that to happen. So he writes them this letter to help them avoid the destruction that he knows is coming. His letter is basically this wake-up call to his friends to tell them, you are a mess and you need help. Well, as some of you know, I have two little girls, Finley, who's 3, and Everly, who's 1. And sorry, I still have to cover Evie's face a little bit because we were in the process of foster adoption. And we got her when she was 2 days old, and now we're about 2 months away from officially adopting her. Yes, it's very exciting. And she is the cutest thing, and she has the most beautiful big eyes. But you just have to trust me on that. But both of my little girls, they are the cutest thing, but they are messy. I mean, every couple hours they eat and there's a mess. And they play and there's a mess. And everywhere they go, I feel like my life is this never-ending cycle of messes and cleaning up messes. And Evie loves to feed herself, but every time she eats, rarely does the food all go in her mouth. But she's so happy. But it goes in her hair, in her face, in her hands, the floor, everywhere. But she loves it. But she's a beautiful mess because she's still learning, she's still growing, and so some messes are okay because she's a beautiful mess. But every time after she's done, I grab a rag and I go to clean her up. And half the time she lets me, I get her all clean, she goes to play, and we're good. The other half of the time, she swats my hand away and turns her head and cries and doesn't want to get cleaned up. And it is so frustrating because I have to clean her up. But it's so frustrating, so sometimes I just want to say, fine, just stay messy. But I love her. I'm her mama. I can't do that. Because I know that if she doesn't get cleaned up, she's going to get a rash or start to smell. And if I let her go around just being messy, she's going to make a mess everywhere she goes and stain all of our furniture and bring ants into the house. And then the whole house is going to suffer because she just wanted to stay messy. That she is a mess and she has to get cleaned up. And I think this is how Paul felt about the Corinthians. See, they were a mess and they had to get cleaned up. And Paul writes to them, he says, I'm writing this not to shame you, but to warn you as my dear children. That he knows that they're a mess, but he's not going to just stand by and let them stay messy. They need to get cleaned up, and he's pointing out the flaws so that hopefully they can get corrected and healed. But unlike Woody, he doesn't go around and just point them out and walk away. He's willing to get in the mess with them. So he continues. He says that I'm coming to you very soon if the Lord is willing. And then I will find out not only how these arrogant people are talking, but what power they have. For the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but of power. He's saying, are you just talking a good game, or do you actually have the power to back it up? Because the message of Jesus is in fact powerful. It has the power to change us. So he's saying, is your faith actually changing you, or is it just a bunch of empty words? Is your faith changing you, or do you just say the right stuff? And he ends with this. He says, what do you prefer? That I come to you with a rod of discipline, or shall I come to you in love and with a gentle spirit? I mean, Paul is basically like a good parent saying, do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Because either way, we've got to do this. We can't just let this go. Do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Because you have to get cleaned up. Either you can humbly admit that you're a mess, or I can hold up the mirror and show you every flaw and point out that you are in fact a mess. How do you want to do this? And remember, Paul has a deep relationship with the people that he's writing to, and this is a private letter. He's not somebody on Facebook yelling out condemnation on those people. No, these are people he deeply loves, like they're his own kids. And he had already risked his life for them, and they knew how much he loved them. That Paul is telling them these things in order to build them up, not tear them down. That he's pointing out the flaws, but he wants them to avoid future pain. I mean, Paul is basically like a friend that points out that you have food stuck in your teeth. I mean, this happens to all of us. And then you walk around all day long, smiling, laughing, talking, and you get home and you realize you had a piece of spinach in your teeth since lunch and nobody told you. It's humiliating. And just like a small thing in your teeth, it's obvious to everyone except you. And if nobody tells you, then you risk humiliation and shame, and if it's unaddressed, decay. That Paul is like a good friend pointing out the flaws in order to help them avoid future pain. Because a small sin or a hidden issue or a broken relationship eventually will come to light and bring humiliation or shame or decay. That it's not good to let it just stay there. That a good friend points it out to help you. And I think this is what Paul is doing for his friends. That he wants to correct them, but he's also going to walk alongside them to get them back on track. But I think even if the Corinthians knew how much Paul loved them, I don't think they really enjoyed reading this letter. Because it's really hard to face our mess, to look in the mirror and see how messy and flawed we actually are, and to have somebody else point it out is never fun. In fact, it can be really devastating. I want to jump back to Toy Story for just a minute. There's one scene where Buzz still thinks that he's a space ranger and that he can fly, and so he climbs up to the top of a staircase and he's going to fly out the window. But of course he can't, and so he comes crashing down, and he hits the ground, his arm breaks off, and he finally realizes, I'm just a toy. And it's devastating. A couple weeks ago, Finley had a fever, and she just had no energy to do anything. And she's wearing her Buzz Lightyear t-shirt, but she can't do anything. I hand her a cup of water to drink, and she can't hold it. And then I ask her to put her hands up so I can change her shirt, and she just looks at me and says, full Buzz Lightyear voice, Mama, I can't. I'm just a toy. So this has become a phrase in our house, that I can't, I'm just a toy. And I think that's how it feels sometimes, that if we honestly look in the mirror and see all of our flaws, it just is so deflating that often we just don't look. We just hide our mess. We don't want to look in the mirror because we're afraid of what we're going to see. And it's easier to just pretend that we're not a mess or we're not that much of a mess. And even if we admit that, yeah, we're a little bit messy, rarely do we show people how messy we really are. It's much easier to just hide our mess. And our pride kicks in real quick to defend us that we're not that bad. But pride is just this thin veil that we use to hide our insecurity and our shame and our fear that maybe we're really not enough. Because in our world, if you admit that you are not smart enough, that you are not, in fact, that good, in fact, that you're not even that worthy, then you get rejected and humiliated, excluded. There are really good reasons to hide your mess. But hiding our mess is not the same as not being messy. Hiding our mess is not the same thing as not being messy. But in God's kingdom, in the ways of Jesus, no one's excluded because they're too messy. The only ones that get left out are the ones that refuse to let God clean them up. They're the ones that miss it. Because God doesn't love you because you're good and perfect and worthy and awesome. And God doesn't reject you because you've messed up. God loves you while you're still a mess, and he's willing to get in the mess with you and help clean you up. Because he's a good father. That this is what God does. See, I've worked at Neighborhood Church now almost 15 years. And what I found is that people have this weird assumption that people that work at a church or that stand up here on a stage somehow have it all together and they don't have flaws and they're kind of great people. And then they meet us in real life and they're disappointed. That we're not as great as they thought we were, and that we don't live up to the hype. Take Forrest. I've known Forrest for a long time. And Forrest knows a lot about God, theology. He reads more than anyone else I know. He's just not that great. I love him. We have been friends for a long time, but he still has issues. And if you go ask him, he will tell you that I'm more of a train wreck than he is, so he's probably right. That we're all just toys. We're all human. Nobody has the right to be arrogant about how great they are because we're all just toys and we all have a mess that we're working through. And your mess might be different than my mess, but we are all a mess and we need Jesus to come and clean us up. That everyone you know is a mess. And Jesus loves every single mess in your life. All those people you think are a mess, yeah, Jesus loves them too. That we're all a mess and we're all just toys. But like my cute little messy Evie, we can be a beautiful mess if we're still learning, still growing, letting God clean us up. We're not going to be perfect, but we can be a beautiful mess because we are a work in progress. So I want to leave you with just 3 practices, 3 things to do so we can turn our mess into a beautiful mess. So number 1 is simply to look in the mirror and admit, I'm just a toy. I'm just a toy. I'm just human, like everyone else. I'm really not that great. I'm not perfect. I'm not always right. I don't know it all, and I don't have it all together. But I don't. I'm just a toy. And yet, God still loves me. And all those people you interact with, they're just toys. God still loves them too. And one of my favorite parts of the Toy Story movie is actually towards the end, where Woody and Buzz are becoming friends, and Woody explains to Buzz that being a toy is actually a really great thing. That Andy doesn't love you because you're the real space ranger to save the universe. Andy loves you because you're his toy, and he wrote his name on the bottom of your foot. He loves you because you're his. And I think that's how God feels about us. He doesn't love us because we're superheroes or we're super awesome. He loves us because we're his. And I think when we get that we're not going to be rejected for our mess, when we get that we're loved even in the mess, then I think it gets easier to look in the mirror. And number 2, ask the question, where am I a mess? What in my life is messy that needs some work? What am I afraid that everyone's going to find out? Or what is that thing that if you really knew this about me, you would judge me and reject me or shame me? And if you can't think of anything, then you just ask somebody that's close to you. Because my guess is they won't even have to think about it. They will be able to tell you right away where you are messy, what in your life needs some attention. If you're really brave, you can ask this question to them. But be prepared, because just like food in your teeth, it's probably true and it's probably obvious to everyone else except you. But we all need to ask, where are we a mess? But the good news is that whatever your mess is, however messy it is, that when it comes into the light, it loses its power over us. That we're all a mess. And when we can admit that to somebody that we trust, not to the world, but someone that we trust, that's when we can truly find healing and hope and actually let Jesus clean us up. And so the last one is simply, who can help you? Who can help you find your way through the mess? Because we all need somebody like Paul. We all need a friend that is willing to point out what they see. Like, who in your life actually has your permission to tell you the truth, to tell you a hard truth? We all need a friend in our lives that is willing to help us see what our pride blinds us from seeing. And then we all need someone to walk us through the mess. And sometimes it's hard to find people like that. That's one of the reasons we're so big on small groups here at Neighborhood and getting connected or peer counseling, that we're all a mess. We know we're a mess, and we need people in our lives to help us walk through the mess. And if you don't have those people in your life, it really can be the difference between surviving a mess and drowning in it. And if it's hard to find those people, or it's inconvenient or scary, there's lots of different ways to get connected at Neighborhood. And we would love to help you find those people that can walk through messes with you, because we all have them. And my guess is whatever group you end up being a part of, you're probably not even the messiest one there. I mean, someone will be, but it probably won't be you. You'd be surprised how messy all of us actually are. So go talk to Jason at the next lounge after this. Go get connected. Find those friends in your life that can help walk you through the mess. Because you're a mess. I'm a mess. We are all a mess. And we need Jesus to come and, like a good father, clean us up so that we can become a beautiful mess, a work in progress. And someday, as we learn and we grow, we're not going to be as messy as we are right now. If we continue to let Jesus clean us up, we might still get food stuck in our teeth and need friends to point that out once in a while, but we're not going to leave a trail of stains and brokenness everywhere that we go. That instead we won't be as messy, and we might even be able to help Jesus clean up our messy world. That love is the goal. And little by little, we might still be a beautiful mess, but Jesus can use us to clean up our messy world. So as we end today, instead of saying a prayer over us, I want to leave you with a song. And I think the lyrics of this song sum up the letter of 1 Corinthians perfectly. So take a listen.